This is James, and I'm here with the Oracle Outlook for the week starting June the 11th, 2018. If you've been following the Oracle Outlooks for the last few weeks, then you know that my theme in terms of deck selection has been decks that I haven't used or handled or haven't appeared in this space for some time. And I had a deck in mind that I only used one other time before. I know it was once in another video. It wasn't an Oracle Outlook video. It was actually one of my Lenormand Grand Tableau videos, so I just let you in that it was a Lenormand deck. So that was the deck that I had intended to use for this week's reading. But then an interesting thing happened. I had a dream just this morning that someone had asked me to do a reading with the Gypsy Witch cards. Now in the dream, I don't remember the reading. I don't remember if I did it, if the card, whatever card showed up. I don't remember any of that. But I do remember that someone had asked me to specifically do a reading with the Gypsy Witch cards. So I thought, because I hadn't shot the video yet, that that was a sign from Spirit, to some degree, that I'm supposed to work with the Gypsy Witch cards today. So that is the deck that I'm going to be working with. The Gypsy Witch cards are published by US Game Systems Incorporated. So I have the deck on hand. I'm going to take a few moments to shuffle the cards. And as I shuffle the cards, I'm focusing on my usual question and intention for these weekly general readings, which is, what do we need to know for the week ahead? Alright, I'm feeling that's good. And now I'm going to go ahead and cut the cards and fan them out. And when I work with this deck, I work with it similar in the way that I work with Lenormand, in that I do a line of 5. So I'm looking through the fan for 5 cards that are getting my attention. So here we have card 1, 2, 3, 4, and we are looking for the final card, and I see it here, card 5. And now that I've selected my cards, I'm taking the remainder of the deck up, and I'll put that to one side. And so now I have the 5 cards face down in front of me. And so I'm going to do just like I did with last week's Lenormand reading. Instead of looking at the center card first, I'm going to start with the card on the far left and work my way through to see what the story is and how it unfolds through the cards. So starting with the card on the far left, opening the line up. Okay, here we have the letter card. So for me, letter represents written forms of communication, and the reason why I laughed is because it's also a card of news and messages. So I thought about the dream that I had this morning that prompted me to work with this deck. But this card specifically talks about communication, but in written form. So seeing that, it could be that we may be having a situation that opens up, so to speak, with some sort of written correspondence or written news or communication. Letter is also about paperwork or document, so that may figure into the situation for some of us this week. And I'm also thinking in terms of written communication and correspondence, if it's not like snail mail, then it would be email or text messages, something along those lines, because they are also written forms of communication. But again, letter in and of itself, just from a general standpoint, represents news and messages, but usually in written form. So that is how I would look at that, the letter card. So now let's take a look at the next card, because each subsequent card will inform us more about the card that came before it. Okay, so here we have the cat card. So cat for me is a card that can represent flattery. It tends to, you know, be that for me. And it actually says in the fortune on the card, it says the cat indicates flattery. So for me, this is a card that can represent flattery. So if we go with the idea about news and messages and written forms of communication, it could be some form of flattery. So it could be a compliment, some sort of praise, something of that nature, because that would all be forms of flattery in written form. So there is that to consider. It could also be, for me, cat as a symbol can represent independence. I tend to think of the comparison between dogs and cats, and it seems to me like, because I used to be a dog owner, that dogs seem to require a lot of attention. They need attention. They're almost like having kids. And so, because I never wanted to have kids, I used to say to my mom that, my dogs, when I had them, were like my children. So I'm seeing that in cats, to me, tend to be a little more aloof, a little more reserved, a little more standoffish. They come when they want attention, and when they're done, they kind of just walk away. I tend to think of cats as being more independent than dogs. I think dogs require a lot more attention, nurturing, therefore that kind of thing, than cats. So I tend to think of cats as being very independent. So there is that. Another thing that I think of cats, and this is just my thing, going with the idea that I'm using the Gypsy Witch cards, and so cats have symbolically represented a witch's familiar, meaning like her animal companion, her animal guide, that kind of thing. So with that in mind, I'm looking at cat, if we go with the idea about news and messages, written forms of communication, it could be from someone familiar, meaning someone familiar to us, right? So there is that to consider. Now, in addition to that, I will add the element of the Eight of Hearts, the card as the inset on cat. If that's the case, then the Eight of Hearts for me can represent this idea about mutual admiration. So if we go with the idea that we're getting news and messages from another party, it would be somebody in which we have some sort of mutual admiration, because I'm thinking in my mind the idea of like the Mutual Admiration Society, that expression. So I'm seeing that. But it could also be, the Eight of Hearts for me can represent a good friend or a loved one. So it could just be a matter of, again, kind of drilling down on possible sources of this news or message that we may be receiving. Or it could also be news and messages, if I go along with the idea, news and messages that we're receiving about, a good friend, a loved one, somebody that we have a sense of mutual admiration for. Could be that. In a spiritual sense, because I talked about receiving communication in my dreams about the deck to use, that's a form for me of spiritual communication. Then the Eight of Hearts can also be about news from one's guardian angel. So there is that. So if you're into angels and angelic energy, then pay attention to any forms of communication that you may receive from your guardian angels. And I will say this, it may be in the form of words, written words. So it may be words written on a page as a message, or that you may see like numbers. I'm thinking my clock is right across the room from me, and so I'm thinking about like you may get messages in the form of numbers, or and that would be like times on a clock, that kind of thing, because that's still visual kind of thing, something you have to actually look at. So I'm seeing it as possibilities with the cat card and the Eight of Hearts. So now let's take a look at the middle card. Typically, I would always say that the middle card for me represents something that we're being asked to focus on, or something central to the situation. So now let's take a look at that card. Okay, and here we have the House card. So this plays nicely with the idea what I talked about, the cat being something familiar. House would be something having to do with family, or people that we share living space with, people who live under the same roof. So there is that. So it could be about something having to do with a family member. And that would play on the idea about familiar, because family is part of that word familiar. So for some of us, we may be focusing on something having to do with a family issue, something connected to family. The House card is also in that regard about comfort, and this idea about stability and security on a personal level. But this would be something having to do with our family lives, possibly, or something having to do with our personal lives. And if we go with the idea, if we pair letter and house, then it may be something having to do with paperwork or documentation with one's housing. So this could be something having to do with rent or mortgage or property tax or something of that nature with this card as well. So I'm seeing that with the House. Now, going with the inset of the Six of Hearts, keeping with an idea about the possibility here of possible sources of this written news or communication or something of that nature. The Six of Hearts is male energy, so this could be a male friend, it could be a male relative, something of that nature. It could be brother, cousin, brother-in-law, uncle, and anything like that, because the Six of Hearts, again, for me, would represent male energy. And then the hearts would represent a relationship. And then with the house card being about family, it could be a male family member who is central to the situation that we are being shown throughout the cards. Again, if it's not about family in particular, I'm going to go with the idea about something being personal. And the phrase for me is about something being close to home, because I just saw an image of a TV show that was called Close to Home. So there may be something about matters close to home that may need our attention and our focus, because this card is the focus card. So now let's take a look at the next card in the line. And here we have, so now here we have the anchor card. So now I talked about this idea about security and stability on a personal level with the house card. It's now increased or reinforced or re-emphasized with the anchor, because anchor literally can represent this idea about stability and security for me. So I would see that as being, a repetitive message. So what do we need to do to focus on this idea of gaining a greater sense of stability and security this week? It could also be too, like somebody is wanting to establish a greater sense of routine, because anchor for me represents routine as well. So it's about getting something in place. If we go with the idea that the house card could represent housing issues, maybe even something having to do with property or anything like that, then the anchor card could represent this idea about fixtures. So for me, it could represent this idea about fixing something or putting work into that, because the anchor is also a work card. So this could be somebody who's working from home, somebody who is establishing work outside of the home, if I go with the idea about house and anchor, because they're so close together as a possibility of a pairing. Then this could be, working in the home, working outside of the home, establishing a routine for a family or, one's personal life, that it's making me feel like there may be some need for some work or effort to kind of create some sort of stability within one's home life, personal life, or family life. So I'm seeing that. It could also be, again, too, this idea about, work outside the house, having to work on something, because anchor can also represent long-term work. It could represent physical work, manual work, those kinds of things, working with our hands, that kind of thing. So I'm seeing that. If it's not about any of those things, another possibility with anchor could be this idea about working through a particular challenge. Now, all these cards so far on the table don't indicate challenge, but if you're coming to this and you're experiencing a challenge in your home life, family life, personal life, then the anchor card is asking you to be serious about working through those challenges, because this card for me can represent being hardworking and being serious about the work. So there is that. It can also be a need to be persistent, because this card is about persistence. And also too, if you're going through a challenge, this is about persevering through the challenge, right? So this card is also about perseverance, and it's also about being hopeful. So I'm seeing that with the anchor card, and then the 5 of diamonds as an insert. 5 is a number of change. So it could just be saying too, navigating through some changes, especially if you found your routine being uprooted in some kind of way. So this card is about putting the energy in. Diamonds for me represents energy. So putting the energy into creating change, right? And change begins with how you choose to handle the situation. The 5 is a number for me that represents hands, being hands-on, and activity and being active. So it could just be saying too, the best way that you're going to move through this is to be hands-on, to put the energy into creating activity around this process of change. So that's what I want to say about the anchor card. And now going to the last card, rounding the line out. And here we have, so now I spoke too soon. So now here we have a great card with the image, which is the rose card, but a challenge because of the inset. So let me talk about the rose card first. So the rose as a symbol can represent beauty, but the idea here for me is like I always look at the rose card as a kind of a double-edged sword, because the rose is a symbol of beauty, but it also has thorns on it. So it could just be a matter of, remember now I just talked about this idea about how we choose to handle a situation. So this card for me can be about how we handle prickly or thorny issues, right? So there is that. So it's about being mindful of how you're choosing to handle a situation, because on some level it may be a thorny or prickly issue. Sometimes too, with the idea about the rose, it's kind of a reminder, like the situation may in one way appear to be beautiful, but it may have challenges that you're not seeing because you're only looking at what's beautiful in the moment. So this could just be about being mindful of sometimes looking at, if something looks too beautiful or too appealing, take a step back and ask yourself, are you really looking at the situation as it is? And now that brings me to the inset. Sometimes for me, I read the Nine of Spades as some sort of loss or disappointment that we are experiencing. So that may be where the thorns from the rose come in, but it could also be too this idea about what I talked about, being hopeful and persistent and having a sense of perseverance with the Anchor card. It's because you want to help yourself navigate through whatever thoughts or beliefs you have about what you might be losing or what is disappointing with the issue, right? And especially if we go back to the middle card and we talk about family or other people being involved, it could just be a matter of working through whatever sense of disappointment you have, particularly with a male family member. So that is how I would look at the rose and the Nine of Spades. So I'm just taking a check. I'm doing a pause to check if I need to say anything else about the Nine of Spades in particular, because it's a card and it's a challenging card as the end of the line. So the best thing I would say too is about if you're experiencing some sort of loss or you see a sense of disappointment with the situation as it's unfolding, as it's blossoming, going with the flower, the rose being a flower I should say, then this card should just be about being hopeful and persevering through that sense of disappointment. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and end this week's Oracle Outlook. I'm James Mitchell, and as I close, I'd like to thank you for sharing space here with me for this week's reading, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you again in our next video reading together. So until then, I'm hoping that you have a wonderful day, and I'm hoping that you have a wonderful week, despite whatever challenges that may come your way. Take care.